The documents, and there's two versions of them. I've seen both versions, and they're a daily briefing document, or allegedly a daily briefing document, from the 1st of March, day 370 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation. Today is day 408, so just over a month old.
Right, so what have we learned? So you say there are two documents here.
There are two versions of it, and what they are updates on the flow of Western equipment into the Ukrainian forces, a restructuring of the Ukrainian forces, an assessment of what's going on the ground, an assessment of the weather and the conditions for potential counterattacks, and a number of other things. One of the areas that there has clearly been changes in is an assessment of the casualties. And one document assesses Russian casualties to be at a certain level. There's another document that has almost certainly been doctored that has Russian casualties down as low as 17,500 dead. Now, to put that into context, UK Defence Intelligence a couple of weeks ago assessed Russian dead as between 40 and 60,000. The Ukrainians themselves assessed Russian dead as over 170,000 so far. And the original document that's in there had a figure that was closer to what the UK was talking about. But we have to be wary of disinformation at the moment. Going back to the Second World War, disinformation, Operation Mincemeat, there are most secret documents that were released by the Allies in a way that they knew that they would get to Hitler's desk. They did, and that convinced Hitler that the Allies were going to attack in through the Pas de Calais, not through Normandy. We've got the Ukrainian spring counteroffensive coming up, and it would be important to get documents out there, either from the Ukrainians trying to suggest something different to the Russians, or from the Russians trying to undermine what the Ukrainians are doing.
Yeah, can we have a look at the conflict as things stand at the moment? Is that going to have a lot of bearing on this spring offensive then?
It will have a bit of a bearing on it. There are two things that are important to the spring offensive. One is the timing of it. And this document, if accurate, will give the Russians a better understanding as when the Ukrainians have the right number of troops in, the right number of new pieces of Western equipment in, and when they'll be properly trained in it. And as I said, there's an assessment on the ground, because if the ground is hard enough for armoured manoeuvre, that is quite important. And what it doesn't do, though, is the other bit, which is say where the attacks should go in. And that is still the gift of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians at the moment are successfully fixing the Russians and everyone's attention in Bakhmut.
Yeah, well, what's happening there specifically?
And in Bakhmut, the Russians have made a little bit of progress. They've crossed to the western side of the Bakhmut River and are putting more pressure on the centre of the town. But the Ukrainians are still holding on. We predicted that would fall quite a while ago. The Ukrainians could, if they believe that the Russians are weak enough in there, carry out one of their first counterattacks in through Bakhmut and fracture that attention that's there. Everything seems to be focused on it. We've got a 1,200-kilometre front line. The other place the Ukrainians could attack into is the Savatoni-Crimea gap. That's an important line of communication. Take another bite of territory back in the same way that they did with Kharkiv earlier last year. Another area where there's a lot of activity going on at the moment is in Advika, just to the north of Donetsk. And the Russian regular military are fighting in there, but have had some significant losses. And if the Ukrainians felt very brave, and I don't think this would be what they'll do in their first part of the counteroffensive, but if they wanted to really fracture the Russian defences, they could come down from the Zaporizhia region down south to the coastline around Mariupol or Melitopol, in that sort of area, breaking that land bridge between Crimea and the disputed Donbass, which is all important to the Russians.